Thank you very much, everybody, for having me. Claire asked me to come along and give a talk, which was maybe a little bit about my research and maybe a little bit about some of the other activities I've been doing in the EDI space in the last couple of years. So I tried to combine them as best I can and came up with this loose title of being bi and Sci-curious. But actually, I think a better title probably would have been Discovering that Academia Isn't Fair and What We Could Start to Do About It. So I just really wanted to start talking about that today and how we can be working with each other to try and improve things for the benefit of everybody. So I'm a geologist by training. I'm not a physicist. I'm used to looking at the world as an Earth, a single system, and how that system has evolved, how it originated and how it evolved through time. And that stems largely from being a kid collecting fossils and rocks on beaches. And I think a lot of kids really like fossils. You're either really into dinosaurs as a kid or things like volcanoes, and geologists, the joke is that you never really grow out of them. So as I got older, I went to university and did a geology degree, so I could study these things in real life and try and make a career out of it. But I began to realize that there were volcanoes elsewhere in the solar system, and surely volcanoes in space was much more exciting than volcanoes here on Earth. So I diversified slightly because I wanted to be able to study volcanoes on places like this, one of our neighbours. This is Mars, one of our closer neighbours. And the volcanoes out there in the solar system are much more exciting and much more diverse than the ones that we have here on Earth for a variety of different reasons. Not only because volcanoes like this is Olympus Mons on Mars, they're actually much larger and much more voluminous than anything we see anywhere on Earth. So Olympus Mons is actually the largest volcano anywhere in the solar system, and it's almost 3 times the height of Everest. So it really is quite a huge beast. But as a geologist, I don't get to travel around and go and visit all of these extraterrestrial volcanoes. So as much as I would like to pretend that this is my job, collecting samples on the surface of another body, unfortunately, I'm not an astronaut. So much more of my day job requires looking at data that has been acquired by astronauts like this. This is the modern day astronaut. We have rovers exploring on the surface of Mars. This is Curiosity a couple of years ago. And of course, we have a couple of new rovers, one joining hopefully very shortly in February and another one launching next year as well. But there's also a natural delivery system. I can't always work with the Mars rovers. I wish I was able to drive one round and decide where it was going and what it was analysing, but I can't. So I have to rely on a natural delivery system, bringing some of these extraterrestrial rocks to Earth. And every now and then we do find them. We do find them scattered all across the world, and we get to go out looking for them. And if you're very fortunate, you might find something like this. So my job doesn't involve walking around on extraterrestrial surfaces collecting samples or driving rovers. It's more likely to be in a lab here on Earth, unfortunately, but looking at these really exciting samples in some sophisticated equipment. And that's where I'm going to leave my research, because that's not really what today's about. Today's about how we can make academia a better environment and what the problems are with academia today. So I wanted to start with kind of a timeline. And these kind of timelines I think are quite common. I was really fortunate that I did my A-levels, went to university for an undergraduate degree and then straight into a postgraduate degree. And then I was really lucky. I didn't do a postdoc. I went straight into a lectureship and then was appointed to the director of a facility. So it seems on the surface to be a very privileged, a very straightforward career path. But unfortunately, there are some things that are hidden behind the scenes that you don't always see when you hear somebody's career trajectory like this. So if I put some years on, I started university in 2005, and obviously 2020 we are today. So this is kind of a summary of the last 15 years of my university life so far. So I came from a very working class background. Nobody in my family had been to university. I was the first person to go to university, and perhaps rather stupidly decided to go to university in London, which meant it was very expensive. So I had a number of part-time jobs. I worked during school holidays. I also worked during term time as well. So I was frequently between my job and my university work doing 50, 60-hour weeks so that I could pay my fees, pay for my rent, and pay for all the extra things that you need at university that nobody tells you about, especially for a geology degree where you need specialist equipment, you need to have all-weather gear, and you go on fieldwork as well, and all of those things cost money. But it didn't just stop there, because there are a number of different aspects that you have to consider with university. Sometimes the unexpected happens, and I unfortunately experienced what I will summarise as a trauma during my undergraduate degree, and that led to some physical and mental health issues that I had to battle through during my degree. So it wasn't just a straightforward start to finish program for me. But I did finish, and I got my master's degree in 2009 and was able to start my postgraduate degree. Not learning from my mistakes before, I also stayed in London for this one. So of course I needed to have a number of part-time jobs to get me through. And not too dissimilar to my undergraduate experience, I had a number of physical health issues that I was still dealing with as a result of the previous ones a few years earlier, and unfortunately had to experience another trauma, which led to some further mental health issues that also needed to be dealt with. Now, the line goes a bit dashed here, and that's because I wasn't sure at this point whether I was going to be able to finish my PhD. When I talk about trauma, it's quite a dramatic situation. It involves some criminality, people, the police being involved and so forth. So I really wasn't sure. I had to take some time off. I was forced into taking some time away from university, from the academic environment, and was encouraged to come back about a year later, which I tried to do, but it was really hard. So in taking on some part-time teaching roles and some higher education, further education, colleges, adult education, it really encouraged me that I wanted to finish what I'd started, and I did eventually go back and finish it. So I was very fortunate that despite all of that, whilst I was waiting to viva for my PhD, I was asked to interview for a lectureship. And this was actually the same week as my PhD viva. So I had my viva on the Monday and then a job interview on the Wednesday. It was a very, very busy week indeed. So after that, I moved from London, finally learning my lesson, and moved down to the University of Plymouth down in the southwest. And there have been a number of things that have happened. Now I have a permanent full-time job. So I am proudly bisexual, and that came out very early on in my university academic career. But obviously every time you move, you have to come out again. And lots of people were very supportive. The odd few weren't, as I'm sure many in the audience can relate to. And then other things started to come out as well. So having what can be classed as a disability and having many health issues, these were kind of exasperated by this not being very well understood. In my first week of employment at the university, somebody told me that I ticked all of the diversity boxes and that they basically shouted bingo every time they saw me. And that meant I could never get fired, apparently, which is not the most reassuring thing to hear in your first week of your first permanent job. And eventually I was removed out of the school and the department. So the school's a number of similar departments together. I was moved into a facility, the Electron Microscopy Centre, which is where I am now. And that led to some mental health issues coming back up again. I felt like I was being singled out, that I was being separated because I was different. And it harked back to some of the traumatic experience I'd had earlier in my university career. But in 2018, I was appointed director of the facility that I was moved into because somebody retired and they asked me to take over, which was fantastic because I gained a little bit more control as to what my university life was going to be. And it allowed me to build a team around me who are a diverse, very welcoming team to our own internal users, but to everybody in the environment around us. And I really looked outside of the university to see how could I improve things, how could I make things better. And in 2018, I found a group of like-minded people who came together and founded TIGERinSTEMM, which is the inclusion group for equity within research in STEM. And the idea was that we wanted to put together a pitch for the My Science inquiry, which was being led by the House of Commons Science and Technology Select Committee. And they wanted members of the scientific environment in academia and in industry to pitch to the UK government as to where inquiries needed to be raised and how we can improve things. And that is what we decided to do. So of course, it's not without issues today, and there are still lingering health issues for myself, as I'm sure many other people also experience. But finding a group of like-minded people outside of a not so healthy work environment has allowed me to really push forward and try and improve that environment for everybody around us. So TIGERinSTEMM were founded, and this is just a few of the tigers from one of our New Scientist articles recently. And we stand for everybody within the STEM environment. And it's a very grassroots organisation. There's no hierarchy. We've got people that have responsibilities for different aspects and they rotate, but it's open to everybody. And we really have a very diverse membership. It started as 50 founding members and we're up now at almost 300. And there's plenty of opportunities to get involved. So if this is something that you would like to do, just Google TIGERinSTEM. This is our official logo. I know it looks very strange, but it is official. We're a very friendly group of people. We're on Twitter, we have a website, there's a blog, there's a YouTube channel, there's hosted seminars. It's a very, very diverse group, and each of us was asked to introduce ourselves and what we wanted to achieve. And for me, it was really about all of the bad experiences that I'd had. I didn't want anybody else to have to face them. And if they did face them, I didn't want them to feel as alone as I did. So the idea is to try and create an inclusive environment for everybody within STEM, something that's accessible, something that's welcoming, and we each have the power to make a positive change. And that's why we all came together as Tigers. So Rachel Oliver, Professor Rachel Oliver at the University of Cambridge, led the pitch in the House of Commons. I'm just hopefully going to be able to play you a few seconds of that so you can see how she introduced this to the UK government.
So I'm here not just for myself, but representing about 200 of my colleagues from across the country, all from different STEM disciplines, so disciplines in science, technology, engineering, maths and medicine. Now, all of us passionately want to improve the diversity of the STEM workforce, and that's a workforce which currently utterly fails to reflect the diversity of the UK population. Now, that lack of diversity does mean that there are thousands of people who are missing out on opportunities for fantastic careers in science. But I'm here to tell you this is not just a problem for those people, it's a real problem for science and by extension for the UK economy.
So Rachel pitched and our inquiry was selected to go forward to a full government inquiry. So Sir Norman Lamb, the Right Honourable Sir Norman Lamb at the time, wrote to the chair of UKRI and wanted to find out how equity in science was being impeded at the stage of funding. Because the whole idea of this was that we know there is a leaky pipeline. We can't keep training people up into an environment that doesn't support them and doesn't retain them. So is there some way in which the funding landscape in the UK, funded by public money, could be better addressed? And eventually UKRI did respond. So Mark Walport sent a very long detailed reply with a 30-page report with this kind of data, and I'm sure you've all been watching the COVID briefings recently and you're all familiar with the quality of data presentation in some of the government briefings. So unfortunately UKRI was not much better. They amalgamated every single research council into one data set and combined them all together. So when they presented information, all they were doing was saying, well, this is the number of men, this is the number of women, this is the number of not disclosed by gender across all research councils. It wasn't in the granular detail that we really hoped to find, so that we could compare different research councils, so that we could compare different areas of the STEM landscape and also within the arts and humanities as well. So eventually UKRI did respond and gave us granular detail that we could drill down and have a look at. And of course, I don't have enough time to present everything that we gathered from UKRI, but they did make it publicly available, and I can share the link if anybody would like to see it afterwards. But I thought I would go through one of the research councils that's probably most likely linked with the research fields that we work in within physics. So the Science and Technology Facilities Council, or STFC, released their data. And I really looked into the proportion of awards that were given at the PI level. So this doesn't include fellowships. This is just for PI for the summary's sake. So in terms of ethnic minorities, unfortunately, UKRI started off really badly because they only collect information as to whether the applicant is white, part of an ethnic minority, or not disclosed. Ethnic minority cannot be broken down any further. It is simply ethnic minority or white or other, which is a problem in itself. But as you can see from the data over the 5 most recent years that we had, the proportion of awardees in ethnic minorities is low in comparison to those from white applicants. But that's also because there are fewer ethnic minorities applying in the first place, probably something to do with the leaky pipeline that we have. So that's maybe not a fair way to look at it. But if we compare it to the HESA return, so this is the number of staff that are working in the same field, according to universities, they return this to central government. So the blue column on the right-hand side of each cluster is the HESA return, so how many staff we know are working in that field. And then the purple column on the left-hand side is how many staff have been funded through STFC compared to the UKRI average in the centre. And you can see that for ethnic minorities, unfortunately, STFC is very, very, very behind the curve. In terms of the application value, this again was huge. We could see a huge disparity in the amount of money that people were asking for if they were white PIs compared to those from ethnic minorities. And that was the case against every year that UKRI released the data for. We know that they collect data for gender. So using the terminology that's provided in the report, we can compare again and see that the number of females in this sector is less, obviously, than male. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone. But the proportion of awardees is quite shocking. Again, if we compare to HESA returns, we can see that actually UKRI do fund far more women than STFC do. But STFC do fund women at a similar level to the HESA return. So that's actually quite promising in terms of the male to female split in terms of funding. But what's more worrying is that women don't ask for enough money in the first place. If you compare the amount of application to award value between men and women, you can see that women ask for a fraction of what their male counterparts do most years, with 2018 being an anomaly. So we're better at getting funding as women. We get a higher proportion of what we ask for. It's just that we ask for less in the first place, and that's perhaps not the best starting point for applications. If we compare this to the UKRI average, you can see that STFC consistently funds women at a lower rate than the UKRI average as well, which is a little concerning. If we look at disability, the way that UKRI collates this data is whether somebody is disabled or not disabled, or if that data is not disclosed at the point of application. And this was perhaps the most shocking one to me, because in terms of the applications versus award, you can see that UKRI funded disabled researchers every year in which data was presented, but STFC didn't until 2018, which is really, really shocking. So in 2018-2019, one researcher who declared a disability at point of application was funded, but never before, which is a really worrying statistic within our community. There are plenty of people with disabilities, self-identified or otherwise. And again, we fall way below the UKRI averages, which is quite a worrying statistic. And finally, the last category, despite there being 9 protected characteristics under the Equality Act, UKRI only provided data on 4. The final one was age, and this is one that's quite close to my heart, because I think it's one that doesn't often get talked about very much. And the way UKRI split up the applications is applicants who are 29 or under, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, 50 to 59, and then 60 plus. And you can see the curves are very similar in most years, but what's really worrying is that those young PIs, and we are talking about young in this respect rather than early career, the young PIs are not getting funded at all, despite there being applications every year for which data was presented. So if we split that up again and compare STFC awards to the UKRI average and then the HESA return, you can see that the HESA return every year told us that there were applicants who were young PIs. But every year, STFC funds far fewer of them than the average. What STFC is very good at, conversely, is funding PIs who are over the age of 40. So if you're over 40, you're more likely to get funding from STFC than you are from any of the other research councils. So there is obviously a bit of a shift once you hit middle age. What does that mean in terms of the award value to the PI? Well, basically, if you're under 30, you're not getting funded by STFC, unfortunately. If you're under 40, you're likely to get a very small award, and those awards increase with your age. If you're age 40 or over, you're likely to get awards. 50 or over, you're likely to get very big awards. And as you can see, in recent years, there have been some enormous awards given to those over the age of 60 and still working in STFC disciplines around the UK. If you want to see how that compares to what people asked for, particularly because there is a very large sum in the 2016-2017 data for the over 60s, 989,000, if you compare that to what they actually asked for of 1.7 million, we're not going too crazy. People are still not getting funded at 100% of what they ask for, but it is obviously a cause for concern that that number is consistently zero and less than £200,000 across the board until you hit the age of 40, as per STFC's own data. So how does that compare to the UKRI mean values? Well, unsurprisingly, way below the averages for the young researchers and way above average, you can see, for the researchers over 50 and over 40 as well in some respects. So there's a huge skew here. Why is that? Is that because the younger PIs don't exist? Well, they do. Informally, I've shared this data with lots of people, and lots of people have come forward and said they've even had applications that have been ranked as fundable. They just haven't been funded. So they're being ranked below colleagues who might have many, many more years experience to them, but they don't appear competitive next to them. And that's not the case across all UKRI research councils. If you look at EPSRC, the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, they actually have much better statistics, and that's possibly because they have a number of schemes aimed at new investigators, so they try and level the playing field, so you're only being compared against colleagues who are a similar career stage, rather than STFC that puts everybody in together as a PI. Because remember, if you're eligible to be a PI for someone like STFC, you're probably unlikely, unfortunately, to be eligible for those fellowships. So as you can see, you're disadvantaged if you're female, you're disadvantaged if you're from an ethnic minority as STFC classify it, if you're a disabled researcher as STFC classify it, and again, if you're a young researcher as STFC classify it. So what if you're a parent or a carer? This is protected under the Equality Act, but there was no data release from UKRI on caring responsibilities or parental status. What if you're LGBTQ+? There was no data release on this from UKRI for any of the research councils either. What if you're a young, BAME, disabled queer woman? Intersectionality is real. You're being disadvantaged at every single one of those stages, potentially, and it having a compounding effect. What if you're all of those things and you also have kids? We just don't know how bad this effect is, and it all comes back to this leaky pipeline. If we're training up the next generation of researchers in UK universities and higher education institutions, we need to make sure that there are careers for them, and we need to retain those skills that we spend so long encouraging in individuals. So that's why I got involved in TIGERinSTEMM, and it's why I've been involved in lots of other organisations as well. So if you would like to try and help encourage colleagues to get involved, you can do this at the institutional level. There are charters like the Athena Swan, the Race Equality Charter, and Stonewall Diversity Champion status that universities can apply for, or you can look at more grassroots organisations like PRISM, like TIGERinSTEMM. Claire mentioned Pride in STEM earlier. There's also LGBT STEM, and then of course there are other areas like Leading Roots, who did a fantastic report into the leaky pipeline in terms of losing Black and BAME students through the academic environment over a number of years. And in fact, they've been disadvantaged themselves today, having been consulted on a BBC report and then not being credited with it. So even the people working in these fields are still suffering the disadvantages of being a slightly more diverse audience that perhaps some people are used to working with. So please, if you're interested, get involved. There are plenty of opportunities for individuals to really make a difference locally, nationally, and internationally as well. Grassroots organisations are the way forward, and we're always looking for more willing volunteers to get involved and help change this, because it's not good enough to just release the data and put it out there. We have to now try and come up with an action plan and get UKRI on board to implement it in this instance, but also change bad practice in the institutions that we all inhibit as well. Thank you.